Hey, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Anybody hear me?
Yes, we hear you. Good morning.
Good morning, Aisha. Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning, Victoria. I see 9 people in the Collaborate session now. Let me just quickly check. Um, Although we have 9 here, we may have more people, more or less, in the discussion, in the discussion board. I have yeah, 9 people exactly in the discussion board. So I would say pretty much everyone. Now I have 10 in the Collaborate session. So pretty much everyone is here, right? Uh, all righty. So since I'm sharing my screen, you should be able to see what's, okay. Now, I would like to call your attention to the announcement board, or whatever you call it, announcement. A couple of updates. Oops, why is it not showing here? Something. Oh, yeah, it's here. First of all, everybody's aware there's another practice test, right? Which will start this Friday, and of course, 3-day window, and a couple of postings about the textbook. Since I've heard a couple of grievances from some of you that have not received the book yet. And it looks like, and there's a very poor communication between McGraw-Hill and, from McGraw-Hill's end. Their response is basically, cut and dried. It's, the book is being printed from an outside, um, from an external entity, external outfit. Yeah, it's a custom book, so but it's still McGraw-Hill. But it's like being outsourced, right? McGraw-Hill is outsourcing the printing of the book. So McGraw-Hill may not be, on top of it, what's going on with the outsourced, printing press. But so they will only give you a pre-formatted answer. So I gave you McGraw-Hill campus representative contact information. Tara Strenfeld, she's the McGraw-Hill campus representative. So please contact her, and she will, because the custom book production, she was involved. I mean, her predecessor wasn't involved, but still, it's her as a as a successor. She has, she has to be on top of this matter, and the there is chapter problem on the Connect, which will start actually, which has started on the 20th. You will, so it starts from the second topic, and this, your class is just getting into the second topic today. See, second topic is now, today is actually, main lecture. Oh, what's going on? Today's main lecture is, today's main lecture is already, into the second topic, financial statements. So please, please remember that in this class, collaborate session is not the main lecture. Our main lecture is already far ahead, and the collaborate session is actually behind because we are discussing, we are discussing everything with more depth because collaborate session was designed to be, it was meant to be the like an afterglow. So as I said, collaborate session is for review and reflection. So obviously we will talk more about, why things are being done this way. It takes more time. And since we've had only like, Monday classes only for 2 weeks, and there was a long gap due to the holiday schedule. And on Monday, we have only 1 hour. So we have very limited, we've had, 2 sessions that were very limited. So we're kind of, behind as far as the collaborate session is concerned. But, the main lecture is on schedule because it goes by, pre-scheduled milestones. So if you are not, if you're wondering, where are we? And if you don't study, there are people who don't have a culture of studying at all, right? Studying is what? Studying is basically conquering the material, right? Conquering the material using your brain. So that means, it will take time. You have to tackle the material. You'll have to tackle it until you get it. Now, so topic 1 is already, done. Last topic of topic 1, the last session, last a video of topic 1 was, ROI and macro part 10, so part that's 8, 9, 10. They will be available because this was as of Monday. They are available until the 25th, which is, this Saturday. So, of course, if 5 days if 5 days pass, then you will have, you can always fall back on, YouTube. But just because YouTube video is there permanently, but the reason I give, time limit to these videos is so that you won't just be relaxed, right? I'm you will still be relaxed anyway, because then, you will think the last resort is the YouTube. But then, there's a timeline, and you have to get to that time milestone, right? There are milestones, and by September 25th, because this was, these were lectures for 20th. That means by between September 20th and 25th, you should study these materials, right? And conquer it. And if you have questions, then you bring it to the collaborate session while, we have collaborate sessions, while we have, collaborate sessions before September 25th. Okay. But then, some people completely ignore all that. They think, just sitting in. Of course, these people won't do well anyway. If you don't have a habit of studying, those people don't do well anyway, in the in-person class anyway, right? Studying means you gotta set aside time for you, and you gotta really, wrestle with the material, because this is not easy. Just reading it once won't do it. Some people think, some people think that if they can read it, they understand it. I've been telling you no, and these are very, very difficult, hard concepts. Hard concepts must, you cannot just read it, and this is not a storybook, right? And some people have no experience of any hard material. They went through K through 12, public education system, but public education system in New York City, in the U.S. in general, um, are very inferior compared to compared to countries like South Korea, Japan, or even Western Europe, because they never punish anything. In public school, everyone is they just pamper. They just give pat on the back and just pamper. Just say things that are pleasing to your ears. Oh, you're good. They just say you're good. It's okay to make mistakes. Well, it's okay to make mistakes, up to a certain point, but beyond that point, repeatedly making the same mistake means there's something inherently wrong with you, something that, um, and if you don't, it's okay if you don't understand, no, it's not okay if you don't understand, because if you don't understand, you can't get ahead. And you are business majors, someday you're probably, nobody will think that I will just, live on, social security paychecks, or, no, you're trying to get a job with, some, um, high profile, um, organizations like, JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs. I mean, if you're, the reason you're studying finance, and especially if you are majoring in finance, and if you're not finance majors, you would still want to work for um, companies like Google or Facebook or Apple. And it's Google's Google's entrance interview is notorious for giving you algebraic questions, the questions that require algebraic thinking, right? And then if you think, because until 12th grade, until high school, they always said it's okay to make a mistake. It's okay that you don't understand. But if you're just pampered by that kind of environment, and you think it's okay that um, if you don't understand, if you it's not okay actually, because you will never get a job. You will never get a job with Google, or you can never get a job. You can never get a chance. I've met people from during the summer. There was a workshop where we had a chance to meet with a lot of recruiters, human resources directors from these organizations, including Google, and also, JP Morgan, and, Bank of America, and, a lot of, these uh, top line, high profile, organizations. And what they were requiring is really what they expect from their recruits, is really a tall order. Tall order. It's a tall order. It's the level of intellect that can handle a graduate level, at least minimally graduate level abstract thinking. And that abstract doesn't mean, uh, ambiguous thinking, it's very rigid, flexible, but rigorously structural, right? And can you do that? No.
Professor,
Yeah.
so what is the topic of the class discussion today?
Actually, we're gonna because last time we were stopped at um, uh, classification of interest rates. I was gonna start with the nominal interest rate versus real interest rate.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Professor.
Okay, all righty. So the point is, if there are, I know not everyone, but some people have no habit of studying at all, and if you and then they just later they just complain only. Okay, that it was too hard to understand. No, if you say it was too hard to understand, but think about it. The majority of the class understood, and that's why there is a mean, the average. All the uh, tests are the tests. They testify. Tests are called tests because they testify to your abilities. And if you're below mean, that means there are, majority of the people are above you. And if you're below the mean, and then just complain that it was too hard, then it's not a very encouraging sign about you. It's not a very positive sign about you. And it is disappointing the more if you just complain without having studied, without having made any efforts. You just sit in the class, you just log into the collaborate session, but the whole time you were doing something else, and even after that you don't study anything. And how do you expect to do well? And then by not studying, if you studied and then you would have discovered that it was too hard, or you couldn't understand something, then you had plenty of chance to bring it to the collaborate session, and you didn't do that because you didn't study. You didn't know what you don't understand, so you don't even bring it to the collaborate session. You don't even have any questions, and then when there's a test, you do very poorly, and then you just don't understand why. You think you were good, but you don't, because you understand the language. Just because you understand the language doesn't mean you understand the thought, the rational thinking behind it, rational reasoning behind it. And without conquering them, without conquering the rational thinking behind it and the analytical thinking behind it, you really don't comprehend anything. Right? So I'm not gonna dwell on this anymore because we're far behind. Now, so last time we talked a lot about inflation, how inflation affects. First of all, we also talked about the difference between lending rate and borrowing rate, and we understand that the lending rate and borrowing rates are determined by the industry. I mean, they call lending rate is the interest rate they charge when they lend money to you, right? It's not from your perspective, from their perspective. Also, borrowing rate is the interest rate that they pay you when you put your money in the bank. Okay, so the difference between the lending, obviously, you all understand that borrowing rate is like very immaterial in the U.S. currently, and pretty much all over the world. It's the same thing. Borrowing rate is very, 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 very derogatory. Not even 0.1%. So, but when you are borrowing from the bank, in other words, when they are lending, the rates vary depending on your credit score. So it could be, for some people, it could be only about 3.25% who have excellent credit score, but for other people who have, bad credit score, it could be, huge, like even 24.99. Now, so the difference between the lending rate and borrowing rate is called spread, and spread is the main source of the banks, right? Because the money they lend, the bank lend, is actually money that came from somebody else, right? And then when we say, because we talked a lot about inflation, let's think about this example. You went to the bank and you want to deposit $10,000. You want to deposit $10,000 for 1 year, right? So, and the bank said your interest rate is 10%. So they will. So this is of course hypothetical situation because in reality we all know interest rate is not 10%. You can never get 10% interest rate these days. So then 1 year later, we know how much will be there 1 year later. You put, so you guys didn't hear me or just didn't pay attention. I said, you put $10K in the bank. Okay. So time interest rate is 10%. 1 year, time is 1 year, right? So 1 year later, how much will you have in your bank account? Which is called future value at time 1. Anybody? No one can. I mean, this is a very, very easy example. How much will there be 1 year later? There are 10. Kenny, 100? What do you mean 100? We'll have $100 a year later?
Wait, on 10K? 10% on 10K?
10. Okay, 10% of 10K is not 100. Yeah, Jared. Yes, of course. 11,000. Yes. That's Jared. So Jared, I'm gonna give you, okay. So please say that because as a Jared, you'll get 0.25 point for that. Yes. The answer is, somebody said, 10% of 10K. 10% of 10K is only the interest, right? But future value is, so you won't have only interest, right? 1 year later, you will have both principal and interest. So it's going to be 11K.
Oh, you have to add the
Right?
principal. Yeah, that makes sense.
So that's the future value at time one. And of course, I'm not going to break this down how, but that's not the big deal. But let's say there was a 5% inflation. There has been, there was 5% inflation between, last year and now. So between this time zero and time one, there has been 5% inflation. So then, what is the real purchasing power of this 11K? Now let's think about it. That means everything is 5% more expensive. That means now if you think about it, this is the nominal dollar value. This is the nominal dollar value. Look, if you have something to say, please
I would
say.
believe it'll be 11,500 or probably 10,500.
No. How can it be 11,500? I mean,
Okay.
inflate.
I made a mistake.
You all,
All right.
you all understand. Inflation is erosion of purchasing power of money,
Is the
right?
answer 10,450?
10,000 what?
450?
It would be something like that. But let me, it would be most likely that. But let me get to, let me give you a further example. So at a price of the Coke, let's say at time zero, was $1. Okay? Price of the Coke at time zero. So last year, the price of Coke was $1. A bottle of Coke or can of Coke was $1. But the price of 1 year later, there was a 5% inflation. So what should be the price of Coke?
It's 105.
105, yes.
105, yes.
Who gave me 105?
It's Kenny.
Kenny, okay. Kenny, so I'll give you 0.25 for that. So because of inflation, look, everything got more expensive by 5%. So a can of Coke is now $1.05. So now with $11,000, how many bottles of Coke can you buy? Of course, I'm not. You don't have to answer that right now, but think about it. You know that it will be less than 11,000 bottles, isn't that right? Because if there was no inflation, a bottle of Coke would be still $1, right? And if that's the case, then with $11,000, you will still buy 11,000 bottles, right? But now, because a bottle of Coke is $1.50, with $11,000, how many bottles you can buy is, simply then, we can find out by dividing 11K by $1.50. I mean, $1.05. I'm sorry, not $1.50. Right? And then I think what was it, Kenny? Someone said, 10,000 something, 400 something. But we can verify
Got
that.
it before I did. All right. Got it. Give him the 2.5.
11,000 divided by, no, we'll have to verify that. Yeah, that would be
10,476.19.
Yeah. Okay. So who was that? Who gave me that? Who originally gave me that number?
I did, Professor.
Who was that? I mean, if you say I did, I don't
Jordan?
know. I can't see.
State your name.
Jordan.
Jordan.
Yeah.
Okay. Jordan. So Jordan, you got 0.25 for that. So so that's 10,476.19. 10,000. But these are bottles, of course, you cannot, so you will have to round it off, right? So that's going to be 10,476 bottles. So this is the purchasing power of your 11K. I mean, without inflation, if there was no inflation, right, the purchasing power of 11K would be exactly 11,000 bottles of Coke. But with 5% inflation, the purchasing power of 11K is only 10,476 bottles, right? So inflation, clearly eroded the purchasing power of money. Now, the result is bottles, because we divided dollars by dollar. But if we divide it by 1.05, because that's the inflation, gross inflation, right? We get the same result, of course, but so suppose if I divide this 11K by 1.05, you might wonder, what's the difference? The difference is, this is the price of the Coke now at time 1, but this is the inflation, gross inflation, right? 105%, right? Gross inflation between time 0 and time 1. And then what comes out here, it's the same number, but this will be dollars. It's going to be 10,000 476.19. That's dollar. That means this is called this is the future value 1 in nominal real dollars. This is future value 1 in real dollars. So what does now you see what real is. Real is the nominal dollars divided by 1 plus pi. And pi stands for inflation, okay? I often, in the past semesters, even if I explain, even if I, already gave example and said in pi means, inflation, in macroeconomics context. And in microeconomics context, pi is the symbol for profit. But, despite all that, some students will still say, what is pi? They say 3.14. Yes, pi is 3.14, but the symbols can be used to mean different things in different contexts. You have to understand that, right? So so this is the purchasing power in real dollars. I mean, nominally you have $11,000, but you have, the purchasing power of 11,000 is only as good as 10,000, the 10,476 a year ago. In other words, what 10,476 could buy a year ago. You have not $11,000 nominally. That's nominally $11,000, but in terms of purchasing power, right? In terms of purchasing power, it can only buy as much as what 10,476 could buy a year ago. So that's the concept of real, right? Real dollars. So real means actually, this is, real interest rate, right? I have two notations for interest rate. One, I stands for nominal interest rate. R stands for the real interest rate. And the real interest rate is nominal interest rate adjusted for inflation, right? Adjusted for inflation. So, and then we have seen already, how we make adjustment for inflation. So, to find the real, real purchasing power of nominal dollars, right? So, but then, we can have a couple of different scenarios. First, here, nominal interest rate happens to be, it happened to be greater than inflation. But as I said, there can be, there are three possible scenarios. One, nominal interest rate is greater than inflation. Two, nominal interest rate is equal to inflation. Three, nominal interest rate is less than inflation. Okay, of course, this was the example of that. In this case, we understand our real interest rate is 5%, right? But what if and oops, we understand at least if our nominal interest rate is greater than inflation, right? We are still better off, right? We're still better off, right? And if nominal interest rate is equal to inflation, then $11,000, nominally you have $11,000 at time one, but the purchasing power will be no different from last year. With $11,000, you can buy only 10,000 bottles of Coke. Does that make sense? Because if inflation is 10%, nominal interest rate is also 10%, then everything is 10% more expensive. Everything is 10% more expensive, right? And then with $11,000, you can only buy exactly 10,000 bottles of Coke, which is exactly like last year, right? So you're no better off, but you're neither better off nor worse off, right? Neither better off or worse off than last year. Now, in the third scenario, if inflation is greater than, so let's think about if nominal interest rate is 10%, but inflation is 5%. Yeah, this is not a difficult question, but a lot of people have hard time. What's going to be the real interest rate then? Anyone? Nominal interest rate is 10%. Inflation is 5%. What's going to be the real interest rate?
I 5%.
I
I
can
was Jason, come on.
5%. 5%. No. Think about it. I'm sorry. Yeah, you're right. But because I gave I gave wrong example. I mean, that's not what I should have said. Because it's the this scenario, right?
Oh, the rate. Let me see. Rate in time.
No, real interest rate. Okay, real interest rate. Nominal rate is 10%. Inflation is 15%. So then what's the real interest rate? Don't type in there because I can't see, right? If you're trying to type into the chat box. Anyone?
Are we still doing it with the example of the Coke bottle or just overall?
We're doing this example. Nominal rate is 10%, right? Inflation is 15%. And what is the real interest rate? Come on, is that
It's
that
like
is
5%.
is it what? What did you say? Did you say 5%?
I think he said 5%, but
No. 5%? No, that's not correct. I mean, how can it be the same? In this case, it was 5%, right? When nominal rate was 10%, inflation 5%. In that case, real interest rate was 5%. But this is a different scenario, so how can it be 5%?
what the
Look, didn't we talk about that? Real means, adjusting for inflation, right?
so would it be
Real
15?
interest.
I was
How can
thinking
it be? How can it be 15%?
It'd be -5.
Inflation is eating. Inflation is eating away. Inflation is eating away, right? Inflation is eroding it.
Oh,
So
negative 5%.
yeah, -5%. Who said that?
Kenny.
Okay, Kenny. Okay, Kenny. I'll give you. I gave you another
I think
0.25.
someone else answered too.
Yeah, I said that, but
Who said
it's
that?
fine.
Who?
Gerard.
State your name. Jared?
Yeah, I think
He
Jared
said
answered it.
Gerard.
Yeah.
Jared. Okay, Jared. Okay, Jared, I'll give you 0.25. Yeah, it's -5. But I haven't heard -5. I only heard 5. I heard 5% many times, well, I haven't heard -5. So, Jared, you got 0.25. Yeah, it will have to be -5%. Let me use. Where is it? Now, think about it. Because real interest rate is real means nominal adjusted for inflation. That means real, right? And because, and through these examples, I've shown you, I mean, nominally, you put $10,000 in the bank, so and the interest rate was, an interest rate they tell you is always nominal because nobody knows real interest rate ex ante, right? You can have because inflation cannot be known with precision, with accuracy ahead of time. There can be a forecast, inflation forecast, but the actual inflation will be most likely will differ from the estimate or the forecast, right? So the actual the actual inflation rate can only be known ex post, meaning after everything is done, right? We don't know the inflation for 2021 until 2021 is over, right? Makes sense? Although we can have a forecast, but the forecast, the actual will always deviate from the forecast. So if you go to the bank, they will never tell you. They cannot they cannot tell you that your real interest rate is 5%. They cannot, right? Because they don't know what the inflation will be, because inflation can be only known ex post. So they will everything is all nominal, right? Interest rate they tell you is nominal, basically. So if based on 10% nominal inflation, 1 year later it will be 11K, right? But this 11K depends on the real purchasing power. Purchasing power of this 11K depends on whether the inflation is less than or equal to or greater than a nominal interest rate. And if nominal interest, so if inflation is less than nominal interest rate, at least you will have more than $10,000 purchasing power. I mean, just like this example, your 11K is actually, has the purchasing power of 10,476. What 10,476 could buy last year, right? Everything, because everything is 5% more expensive. But if the inflation is 15%, in which case, oops, I didn't want to move it around. Accidentally moved around. Then obviously, your purchasing power will be a lot lower, right? So let's find out. Let's calculate the real purchasing power, right? When inflation is 15%. I gotta move this around. All right, I'll do it here. So the future value 1 in real dollars, then it's going to be 11K over 1.15. Because everything is 15% more expensive, right? The purchasing power will be of 11K will be, I'll have to clear everything, and then 11,000 divided by 1.15. Okay, there you go. Then it's going to be 9,565.28. 9,565.28. Okay, so then what does this mean? Of course, you're worse off, right, than a year ago, clearly worse off, because you nominally have $11,000, but what this $11,000 can buy is just like what $9,565 could buy a year ago, right? So actually, if you think about it, by lending money, right, and you lended money, because putting money in the bank is lending money, right? By lending money and for lending money you earned 10% interest. So nominally you have $11,000, right? But in real purchasing power, right? In real purchasing power, in real terms, you can only buy what $9,565 could buy last year. Only in terms of Coke, you can buy only 1,565 bottles of Coke now. So you actually, it's like, if you think about it, what is the meaning of negative real interest rate? Negative real interest rate means actually, as a lender, you give interest to the borrower, right? That's what it means. I mean, think about it. It may be it may be hard for you to swallow this concept, but how can a lender pay interest? I mean, if interest rate is negative, then instead of borrower paying interest, lender is paying interest, right? That's going to be the case because from the borrower's perspective, right? They are paying back much cheaper. They are paying back much cheaper than what they borrowed, what they owed. Isn't that right? Because from the bank's perspective, think about it. Bank is the borrower here. A year ago, they borrowed $10,000 from you, and they are paying back, because the interest rate is 10%, they are paying back $11,000 to you. They are paying back, but nominally $11,000. But in terms of, because purchasing power has gone down, that $11,000 is only in real purchasing power only 9,565. So it's a lot less burden. I mean, it's a cheaper bargain, right? From the borrower's perspective, it's a cheaper bargain. So everyone is okay with that? Everyone is following?
I'm following. I got a question.
Mhm.
I think you're about a few points off actually. It's actually 9.65.22. I mean 9,565.22.
Is that maybe yeah, you're right. You're correct because yeah.
That's Jason Camacho actually responding to that.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Yeah, as I copied the number, I didn't remember correctly. I mean, I looked at 217, and that 7 stuck in my mind.
Yeah, that's exactly what happens to me as well. So I
Okay.
just do it again. Make sure.
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate it. I appreciate it. So where was I? So the point is negative real interest rate, negative. Think about it. Negative in negative nominal rate is not possible. I mean, there is an instance of some negative nominal interest rate, but who's going to put the money in the bank? Who's going to lend the money if the nominal interest rate is negative? Hmm? Who's going to lend money if the nominal rate is um, nominal interest rate is negative? Nobody. I mean, uh, I remember back in like 2019, some one of the member countries in European Union, or was it Sweden, tried out negative real interest rate. Japan also uh, dabbled with negative real interest rate. But think about it. Not It's not negative real interest rate. They dabbled with negative nominal interest rate. But no, but if the interest rate is negative, nobody will put their money in the bank. But that was the intention in Japan. Because people do not borrow money, but just save money, right? And which is the result of the cultural uh, uh, it's the cultural thing. They consider they consider debt almost like they consider it as sinful to have debt. But but Japan lost a decade because of slow economic growth, and slow economic growth is mainly due to not borrowing, because need to borrow businesses must borrow to expand their production capacity. But if they don't borrow, uh, economy cannot expand. So they even tried out negative nominal interest rate. If the interest rate is negative, that's like punishing the savers, right? You understand? If interest rate is negative, it's like punishing the savers. So then, if you don't want to get, by putting money in the bank, you have to pay interest. You wouldn't do that. You would rather put the money in. What would you do? You would put the money in the stocks. You wouldn't, leave money in the bank. But they even tried it. It didn't really work that well. Other than a case of Japan, there is no such thing as negative nominal interest rate. The only exception would be, I mean, if you have Swiss bank account, you will pay interest to the bank for keeping your money and your valuables. It's just like having it's like paying fee, right? But then since it is since it is punitive, it's punishing the savers. In reality, you don't find negative nominal interest rate, but at least there can be negative real interest rate. But then also the effect is the same. Think about it. if your real interest rate is negative, it's like this: you put $10,000 in the bank and you get $11,000, but actually in return, this is you get much lower in purchasing power. So what does that mean? You wouldn't. This is not a good situation to borrow. I mean, this is not a good situation to lend money. This is a good situation to borrow money, right? And especially if you borrow money short term, like on the 1 year, and inflation, and as you can see, 1 year later we will know exact inflation, but every month we still know month to month inflation, and if you're borrowing short term for like 1 month and paying back the next month, if you borrow $1 million, and the the Fed funds rate is very low. Fed funds rate is almost 0 to 0.25%. And if you're a prime category borrower, in other words, if your credit rating is very high, you can borrow very cheap. And let's say you can borrow at like 0.25%, 0.25, right? And especially if you're a bank, you will borrow at zero from another bank. That's what Fed funds rate is. If you borrow from another bank at 0.25 overnight, just overnight, or even 1 month at 0.25%, and you've seen the inflations, this year alone, right? March, April, I mean, every month and all of these years, was there any month that the inflation was not above 0.25? Was there any month? No, there is hardly any month. There was hardly any month that inflation was below 0.25. They were all above 0.25. So if a bank borrows at 0.25%, right, and pays back, right, inflation is 5%. Actually, the borrower is paid 4.5% interest. Lender is paying 4.5%, 0.25, so 4.75% interest. Lender is paying. Borrower is getting actually 4.75% interest. So borrower, it's because the burden on the borrower is a lot lower. This is a good time. This creates a situation where it encourages borrowing, right? So I wouldn't say that it's the Federal Reserve's intent to create negative real interest rate, but the conclusion is the same, right? When inflation is, and I've been telling you, Fed's target inflation rate is about 2%. It has been about 2% for a long time, and inflation has been somewhere around that, at least, if not 2%, at least like 1.5%, sometimes even 3%. So, and the Fed funds rate is like 0.25%. It naturally creates a negative real interest rate. So it works as it incentivizes borrowing, right? Makes sense? It incentivizes borrowing, okay? Incentivizes borrowing. All righty. So I think we have, it's 12:06. So it's a good time to take a break. Let's take a 10-minute break and reconvene at 12:16. Okay, let's reconvene at 12:16. All right, all righty. Let's All right, we're back. We're back. This is weird. I'm sharing my screen. Why isn't it showing? Oh, yeah. Okay. All right, we're back. And the interest rates, the data, interest rate data we've seen is, Fed funds rate, right? Fed funds rate is actually short for federal funds market rate, federal funds market rate. And from the name, it may give a wrong impression because some people think, because the name is federal funds market rate, some people mistakenly believe this is, controlled, owned, or owned by the Federal Reserve. No, it's not owned or controlled by the Federal Reserve. Okay, Fed funds market is actually like a like stock exchange, or but online marketplace, just like eBay, or online marketplace where commercial banks borrow from and lend to each other. Okay, so it is totally a private marketplace. It's not run by the state, or it's not run by Federal Reserve. It's just between the commercial banks, right? It's an exchange place for online, right? Exchange place for uh, commercial banks. Um, And the commercial banks have commercial banks need to borrow from each other or lend to each other constantly, right? Constantly. Um, and think about it, because it's between the banks, the rate must be the lowest, right? Just like the if you work for, let's say, you get a preferential, treatment if you work for, let's say, Chrysler. If you work for Chrysler and buy a Chrysler car, you will get employee discount, right? And between the industry, I mean, within the industry, right? Within the between the channel members within the industry, there is a discount. Now, of course, the same thing goes for the commercial banks as well. Commercial banks are all in the same industry, so if they lend to and borrow from each other, it will have to be at the lowest rate, obviously. So that's why Fed funds rate forms the baseline of all interest rates. Forms the baseline of all interest rates. But the Fed funds rate is also, although it is not run by Federal Reserve can influence the Fed funds rate. Okay, and influence. When I said influence, it means through the market operation, right? Through intervention in the market, not like intervention in the market means Federal Reserve also takes part in the market operation, right? But it's not the Fed funds market that Federal Reserve comes into play. Federal Reserve actually goes to the bond market, and from the bond market, Federal Reserve increases or decreases the sale of bonds, or buy back the bonds that were issued by the Treasury, right? Treasury bonds, or Treasury notes, or Treasury bills, and through that operation, they affect Fed funds rate. So we're going to have to, there are a couple of things we have to cover before getting to open market operation. But let's take a look at an example of how Fed funds rate works between the banks. I mean, how it affects, why it is the lowest, interest rate. So let me, suppose we have Bank A and Bank B. And Bank A is in New York City, so it's in the East Coast. Bank B is in California. Bank B is in California, so let's say it's in LA, and A is in New York. Normally, they don't need to contact each other, but they will need to, because if the banks have something called reserve requirement. I will just use acronym because it takes too much time. Reserve requirement. What does that mean? That's the required level of reserve that the bank must hold in their vault, right? And sometimes, at the end of, and think about it, I told you the business of banking is in lending money. And if the bank has, $1 million in their reserve, and bank has, generally, two types of reserve, checking and savings, right? And if they have, so the bank reserve, so bank has, their reserve comes from checking and saving, and also their own equity. So now let's think about it. What does this mean? Suppose the bank, if you are starting up a bank, let's say you're starting up a bank, right? You must have startup capital, right? Any business must have startup capital. So some partners got together, some people got together to form a bank, and they have to chip in. They have to chip in the startup capital. So they chipped in, let's say, $1 million. That's their startup capital. Okay, and then they start the business, and then customers come in and they will make deposits. Let's say, so bank offers two kinds of accounts: savings and checking. And let's say they have $1 million in savings and $1 million in $1 million in checking. Okay. And other than this $1 million that came from their own pocket, these checking and 1 million in checking and 1 million saving are all debt. It's their liability, right? It's their liability to their customers, right? And as I said, the business of banking is mainly in lending, right? They will have a strong incentive to lend all of this, all of this. And of course, if you add up all of this, that's called total assets. It's going to be 3 million, right? And if they can charge 10% on their lending, they will be tempted to lend all of it. Isn't that right? Hmm? Is everyone following?
Yes.
Okay, good. So, because if they can charge even 10%, then the interest will be $300,000. So they will be tempted to lend all of this money. But then, they can lend out, theoretically, they can lend out 100% of their own equity, right? They can lend out 100% because it's their own money. And there's no restriction because if they lose it all, of course, this part of this 100 million must have been used to, lease the, bank office space. Some of it was used for starting up the business, but starting up the bank. Basically, if you still have 1 million in equity, you can lend up to 100% because it's their own money. If they lose it, they just lose it. They don't owe it to anyone, right? So, but they are tempted to lend out 100% of it. And they were tempted to lend out also 100% of that, everything. But savings, they can loan out up to 100% because as long as they are not lending out to a high risk borrower, they won't lose the money. They won't default and they will get the money back. As long as they are lending out to the high credit worthy, low risk borrower, right? They won't lose the money. They will get it back. And savings, the money in the savings, basically that's the money that they want to loan out for long term, right? So generally the money in the savings account or CDs, especially the money in the CD is, bound by contract. I mean, if you have 2-year contract on the CD, that means you can't withdraw money. You can't breach the contract within the 2 years. I mean, there will be a penalty if you breach the contract. But the idea is, if all this let's say all of this 1 million in the savings is CDs, they can loan out. They can make a commitment to lending out for 2 years, right? So they will be lending out 100%, and they will also be tempted to lending out. They will also be tempted to lending out 100% of the money in the checking account, but that's going to be risky because checking account is where the checks are drawn against. So, and people, and also checking account, you have to maintain optimal level of reserve to handle all the checks that come in for clearing and also ATM withdrawals. So they cannot loan out 100%, right? But they are tempted. Anyway, they will be tempted to loan out the maximum, right? But it's not going to be in the US, it used to be 90% that they could loan out, right? That means 10% is the required reserve. So I should say 90% here. And by Federal Reserve requires the banks to hold only at least 10% as required reserve. And after financial crisis, it's actually now almost 0%. That means that's going to be very risky, right? Because when people, because checking account is a demand deposit, right? Meaning that means when you demand, when the customers demand, they have to give out money. Checking is demand deposit. So it used to be that the banks had to maintain 10% in reserve, right? 10% of the reserve in the bank. At the end of the day, if the reserve is not 10%, then they will have to borrow from another bank. So let's say Bank A borrowed 1 million from Bank B. Of course, at Fed funds rate, right? They will pay back 1 million and 0.25% interest. But just to make our thought experiment easy and simple and easy, let's assume that the Fed funds rate is 10%, right? Let's assume Fed funds rate is 10%. Now think about it. Just to make it easy. Also, another situation is somebody came to Bank A, Mr. X came to Bank A, and he was asking for a loan, $1 million loan. So Mr. X, and Mr. X has a very high credit rating. Mr. X has excellent credit rating. So Bank A doesn't want to lose, this customer. And he wants to get 1 million. So Bank A doesn't have 1 million. I mean, their reserve is lower than 1 million. So what does Bank A do? Will Bank A say, I'm sorry, we can't, we don't have money, so can you come back later? Or can you go to another bank? This is not something that can happen, right? Bank A won't turn away their customer. So what they can do is they will reach out to, they will go into the Fed funds market and search for the banks that are willing to lend. And they found Bank B. So they reached out to Bank B and, got a loan at Fed funds rate. So they loaned out to Mr. X. And Mr. X, let's say, 1 year later, this is a 1 year loan, and he will have to pay back more than 1.1 million. Isn't that right? Does it make sense? Because they will have to, Bank A will have to pay back 1.1 million to Bank B. Bank A will have to charge something like 20%. So it's going to be like 1 million plus, prime rate. So prime rate is about 3% above it, but let's say in this case prime rate is 20%. So it's going to be 1.2 million, right? And then Bank A will pay back Bank B 1.1 million, right? Which is 1.1 million. And then Bank A makes 0.1 million here, right? In this deal, Bank A makes 0.1 million. But then where did that 1 million come from? I mean, you would say, oh, from Bank B. But actually, Bank B also, it's a deposit of a customer. And let's say it's Mr. Y. So Mr. Y, when loaned 1 million to Bank B, it says so that means he's saving with Bank B. He's banking with Bank B. But I've been telling you, the borrowing rate or the lending rate from the bank's perspective, right? Borrowing rate from the bank's perspective, borrowing rate, regardless of who you are, you get only like 0.1%. Regardless of what your credit score is, you get only 0.1%. So let's say in this example, the borrowing rate is 1%. So then what does Mr. Y get? Mr. Y will get 1.01 million, 1.01 million, and Bank B keeps, because they got 1.1 million from Bank A, they will keep 0.9 million, right? So this pretty much, it's a simplified version, but it sums up why the borrowing rate is so low, right? When you are saving money in the bank, why the borrowing rate is so low? Why is it 0.1%? Not even 0.1%. Why? Because Fed funds rate is 0.25, right? So if your bank is lending your deposit, you have $10,000 deposit in your bank, and if your bank is lending to another bank, right? The worst case scenario is Bank A lending to Bank B, right? I mean, if Bank B, look, Bank B can find a better borrower, right? If let's say Mr. Z comes directly to Mr. X comes directly to Bank B and borrows from Bank B, they can charge 20% to Mr. X, and so their spread will be much bigger. But in the worst case scenario, nobody comes to borrow to Bank B, but just Bank A borrowing from Bank B, and then in the lowest return they can make from lending to another bank is the Fed funds rate. So if the Fed funds rate is 0.25, and the money they lend to another bank comes from actually Mr. Y. So then what they can pay Mr. Y has to be much lower than 0.25, right? So that's why the borrowing rate currently is so low, right? Because it's based on the Fed funds rate, and if they are lending, uh, if they are lending through Fed funds system, they have to pay 0.25, and they are lending the money that you saved with them, and so what they can pay you is something less than 0.25, and they try to maximize the spread. So even 0.1% is too good, right? For them, it's too good. They want to maximize the spread. So it's like, not even 0.1%. It's like, 0.01%. Okay. All right. Does that make sense? Does that make sense, everyone? Is there anybody? All right, Jordan, thank you for confirmation. I don't know what else, what happened with everybody else. So we're already out of time. We're already out of time. So I'm gonna have to call it a day. So uh, there is a practice test coming up this weekend. Um, uh, Good luck with your test, and I will see you guys next Monday. Okay.
Okay. Thank you,
All
Professor.
right. All righty. You're welcome. You have a good weekend. Okay.
Will it be
Gonna
posted today or will it be posted like tomorrow?
What do you mean, the test itself?
Yeah, the
Please
practice
go.
test.
Yeah, please go to the announcement. It says it will become available at 12 a.m. Friday, right?
Okay. All right, thank you.
Always, consult. Yeah, all the it's all posted there, so you go to, right, go there. That's the primary source of your information. Okay, it's your primary source of information. Okay, all
Okay,
righty,
thank you.
all right. Okay, I'm signing out.